The phone rang at 2 in the morning, jolting me from deep sleep. Mom's panicked voice cut through the darkness like broken glass. "Cannon, the power's off, and I can't find any flashlights. Everything's dark and I don't know what to do." As I stumbled around my apartment gathering spare batteries and emergency lights, my mind raced back to that explosive night exactly 1 month ago. She had screamed those words that changed everything between us forever. "If you're so smart, then pay your own bills." That confrontation shattered our relationship and forced me out of the house I'd called home for 28 years. Now she was calling me for help, completely unaware of what I had discovered after leaving. Her financial secrets were about to unravel in ways that would shock us both. 1 month earlier, I was living in our family home in Lakewood, a quiet suburb, just west of Denver. At 28, I worked as a software developer for a tech startup downtown, pulling in decent money, but still living with my widowed mother, Sarah, while I saved for my own place. Every month, I handed her $1,500 to help with household expenses, groceries, and utilities. It seemed like the right thing to do after Dad passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack. That particular Tuesday evening started like any other. I came home around 7:30, tired from debugging code all day, and found Mom in the kitchen making her famous pot roast. The smell of herbs and slow-cooked beef filled the air, reminding me of childhood dinners when Dad would tell us about his construction projects over steaming plates of food. "How was work, sweetheart?" Mom asked, not looking up from the stove. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in its usual ponytail, and she wore the same faded blue apron she'd had since I was in high school. "Pretty good. We're launching a new client portal next week, so things are hectic." I loosened my tie and grabbed a glass of water from the refrigerator. "Oh, I need to buy a new laptop for work. My current one is 4 years old and barely keeps up with the development software." Mom's wooden spoon stopped stirring. She turned around slowly, her green eyes narrowing. "A new laptop? How much is that going to cost?" "Around $2,000. It's a business expense and I've been saving up for it." $2,000. Her voice rose an octave. "Cannon, that's completely irresponsible. You're throwing money away on expensive toys while I'm struggling to keep this house running." I set down my water glass harder than necessary. "Mom, it's not a toy. I need reliable equipment for my job, and I'm not throwing money away. I contribute $1,500 every month to this household. $1,500 doesn't even cover half of what it costs to maintain this place," she snapped, wiping her hands on her apron with sharp, angry movements. "The mortgage, utilities, property taxes, insurance, groceries, repairs. Do you have any idea how much everything costs?" "Actually, I do." I pulled out my phone and opened the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining. I've been tracking our household expenses for 6 months. The mortgage payment is $1,100. Average utilities run about $350. Property taxes are paid annually and work out to roughly $220 monthly. Groceries average $400 for both of us. That's under $2,000 total. Mom's face flushed red. "You've been spying on me, going through my financial records." "I haven't been spying. I pay attention to the bills when they come in, and I see the amounts when you ask me to help with payments. The math doesn't add up, Mom. My $1,500 should more than cover my share, but you're always saying money is tight." "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice getting louder. "There are expenses you don't see, responsibilities you don't understand. Your father left me with a mountain of debt and problems you can't even imagine." "Then show me the bills. Let's sit down and go through the budget together. If there are hidden expenses, I want to help figure them out. I don't need to justify anything to you." Mom slammed the wooden spoon down on the counter. "You live in my house, eat my food, and have the nerve to question how I manage our finances. This is exactly the kind of entitled attitude that's going to get you nowhere in life." The conversation was spiraling out of control, but I couldn't stop myself. Years of guilt about Dad's death, about not being successful enough, about being a burden, all came rushing out. Entitled, I work 50-hour weeks and give you most of my paycheck. I haven't taken a real vacation in 2 years because every time I try to save money, there's some emergency that requires me to empty my account. Oh, poor Cannon, Mom said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Life is so hard when someone else pays for your housing and food. You want to know about real responsibility? Try losing your husband at 50 and being left to raise an ungrateful son who thinks computer games are more important than family. And that's not fair, and you know it. I've been trying to help ever since Dad died. And my job isn't playing computer games. I write software that helps businesses run more efficiently. Your father built things with his hands, real things that mattered. He didn't sit in an office all day staring at screens and pretending it was important work. That comment hit like a physical blow. Dad had always been proud of my education and career choice. He used to brag to his construction crew buddies about his son, the computer expert, who was going to work in an air-conditioned office instead of breaking his back in the Colorado sun. Don't you dare use Dad's memory to make me feel guilty about my career, I said, my voice shaking with anger. He supported my education. He was proud of what I do. Your father spoiled you. He filled your head with ideas about being special, and now you think you're too good for real work. Well, if you're so smart about money and so successful with your fancy computer job, then pay your own bills. See how far your computer skills get you in the real world when you don't have mommy taking care of everything. The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling pot roast. We stood there glaring at each other across a gulf that felt impossible to bridge. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had broken between us, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. Fine, I said quietly. I'll pay my own bills. Good. Maybe some independence will teach you to appreciate what you've had here. I'll be out by tonight. Mom's confident expression faltered. What do you mean out? You told me to pay my own bills. I can't do that while living here and giving you $1,500 a month. I'll find my own place. Cannon, don't be ridiculous. I didn't mean you should move out. I meant you should be more grateful and less critical of how I handle things. But the damage was done. The disrespect, the dismissal of Dad's memory, and years of financial guilt had crystallized into a decision I couldn't take back. That night, while Mom was upstairs crying and making phone calls to my Aunt Karen, I packed everything I owned into my car and a small moving truck I rented from the hardware store down the street. As I was loading my computer equipment, I accidentally knocked over a stack of mail on the kitchen counter. Papers scattered across the floor, and as I bent to pick them up, one document caught my eye. It was a bank statement from an account I'd never seen before. The header showed Sarah Martinez, my mother's full name, and an account balance of $43,612. I stared at the paper, confused. Below that was another statement from a different bank showing monthly deposits of $2,800 labeled Survivor Benefits. I had no idea Mom was receiving widow benefits from Social Security. She'd never mentioned any government assistance, and she certainly never acted like she had an extra $2,800 coming in every month. My hands shook as I looked through more of the scattered papers. Credit card statements showing zero balances, a savings account with over $18,000, investment statements from accounts I'd never heard her mention. Mom had been receiving almost 3 times what I contributed every month, plus she had substantial savings. Yet she'd made me feel guilty about every dollar I spent, every attempt to save money for my future, every small purchase that wasn't directly benefiting the household. The financial struggle was a lie. The guilt trips were manipulation. The desperate need for my $1,500 was completely fabricated. I carefully restacked the papers exactly as I'd found them, finished loading my belongings, and left the house keys on the kitchen counter. At 11:45 that night, I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, feeling a mixture of liberation and devastating betrayal. The first week of independence was a whirlwind of apartment hunting, lease signing, and establishing my new life in downtown Denver. My coworker Jake offered his couch while I searched for a place, and within 5 days I found a decent one-bedroom apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. The rent was $1,200 a month, utilities included, which was less than what I'd been paying Mom. Setting up my new place felt like awakening from a long dream. I could eat what I wanted, watch what I wanted come and go without reporting my schedule to anyone. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was shadowed by the memory of those bank statements and the realization of how deeply Mom had been deceiving me about our family's financial situation. Mom called constantly during those first few days. Her strategy alternated between anger and emotional manipulation. Monday morning's voicemail was furious. "I can't believe you're being so selfish and dramatic. This whole thing is ridiculous, and you need to come home and apologize for embarrassing me in front of the neighbors." Tuesday evening's message was tearful. "Cannon, sweetheart, I miss you so much. The house feels empty without you here. I was just stressed about money, and I said things I didn't mean. Can we please talk and work this out?" Wednesday brought desperation. "I need your help with the computer. The internet isn't working, and I can't figure out how to pay the electric bill online. You know I'm not good with technology. Please call me back." I didn't respond to any of the messages. Every time I considered calling her back, I remembered those bank statements and the years of guilt she'd piled on me about being a financial burden. The manipulation was so calculated, so thorough, that I needed time to process the full scope of what had been happening. By Friday, I was settled enough in my new apartment to tackle some practical matters. I needed to change my address with the bank, update my voter registration, and redirect my mail. The post office clerk handed me a stack of forwarded letters, and I sorted through them while sitting in my car in the parking lot. Most of it was routine stuff, but 3 pieces of mail made my blood run cold. They were credit card statements addressed to me for accounts I had never opened. The first was from a major bank credit card with a balance of $4,732. The second showed a department store card with $3,115 charged to it. The third was a gas station credit card with nearly $6,000 in charges. All 3 statements showed the same phone number for contact information, Mom's number. My hands trembled as I opened each statement and examined the charges. The bank card showed purchases at grocery stores, pharmacies, and restaurants throughout the past 8 months. The department store card had clothing purchases, home goods, and electronics. The gas card showed not just fuel purchases, but convenience store charges and automotive services for a car I didn't own. Someone had been using my identity to open credit accounts and run up debt in my name. The phone number, the timing of the charges, while I was living at home, and the types of purchases all pointed to one person, my mother. I drove straight to my bank and requested a full credit report. The loan officer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, walked me through the results with growing concern. "Mr. Martinez, this shows 5 credit accounts associated with your Social Security number, but you're telling me you only opened one of them." "That's right. I have one credit card that I opened in college, and I pay it off every month. I've never applied for any of these others." Patricia's expression grew serious. "This appears to be identity theft. Someone has been using your personal information to open unauthorized accounts. Do you have any idea who might have access to your Social Security number, birth certificate, or other identifying documents?" I thought about all the times Mom had asked me to hand over my Social Security card for tax purposes, or requested my birth certificate for insurance updates, or needed my driver's license number for emergency contact information. I had trusted her completely and never questioned why she needed those documents. "I think it might be a family member," I admitted. Patricia nodded knowingly. "Family identity theft is unfortunately common. Parents sometimes use their children's information when they can't qualify for credit themselves, thinking they're not really hurting anyone because it's keeping it in the family. But this is a serious crime with real consequences for the victim." She helped me file fraud reports with all 3 credit bureaus and provided documentation I would need to dispute the unauthorized accounts. The process was going to take months, and in the meantime, my credit score was completely destroyed. As I drove home to my apartment, I tried to wrap my head around what I'd discovered. Mom hadn't just been lying about her financial situation, she had been actively stealing my identity and destroying my financial future. Every lecture about responsibility, every guilt trip about money, every criticism of my spending had been projection from someone who was committing fraud in my name. The widow benefits the hidden savings accounts, and now the identity theft painted a picture of someone who was not just emotionally manipulative, but criminally deceptive. This wasn't a stressed single mother making poor decisions. This was calculated financial abuse that had been going on for months or possibly years. That night, I sat in my new apartment looking out at the Denver skyline and felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Angry that I'd been so thoroughly betrayed by the person I trusted most, but relieved that I'd finally seen the truth. The independence I'd thought would teach me about responsibility had instead taught me about how deeply I'd been deceived. My phone buzzed with another voicemail from Mom, but for the first time since moving out, I deleted it without listening. Whatever sob story or guilt trip she had prepared, I wasn't ready to hear it. I had my own problems to deal with now, starting with repairing the financial damage she had done to my future. The next 3 weeks were consumed with documenting the identity theft and working through the legal process of fraud recovery. My friend Jake, who worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm, helped me understand my options and organize the evidence. "This is pretty extensive," Jake said as he reviewed the credit card statements spread across his kitchen table. "Most identity theft cases involve 1 or 2 accounts, but this looks like a systematic pattern over at least 8 months. We created a detailed timeline of when each account was opened, cross-referencing it with my work schedule and travel history to prove I couldn't have been present for the applications. The evidence was overwhelming. Every account was opened during business hours, when I was at work using addresses and phone numbers I had never used. The good news is that you have a strong case," Jake explained. "The bad news is that prosecuting family members for identity theft can get complicated, especially when there's shared residence history. Prosecutors sometimes see it as a domestic dispute rather than a clear-cut crime." While building my case, Mom's harassment campaign escalated dramatically. She had moved beyond tearful voicemails into active interference with my life. On Tuesday morning, she showed up at my workplace. I was in a client meeting when our receptionist knocked on the conference room door. "Cannon, there's a woman in the lobby who says she's your mother. She's demanding to speak with you about a family emergency." I excused myself and found Mom in our office lobby dressed in her best church outfit and putting on a performance for anyone within earshot. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a tissue dramatically. "Cannon, thank goodness," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've been so worried about you. You disappeared without a word, and I thought something terrible had happened. Mom, this is my workplace. You can't just show up here." "I wouldn't have to if you would return my calls. I'm beside myself with worry. The neighbors are asking questions, and I don't know what to tell them about why my son abandoned me." My coworkers were staring, and I could see my boss watching the scene from his office doorway. This was exactly the kind of drama that could damage my professional reputation. "We can talk later, but you need to leave now. This is not appropriate." "Not appropriate?" Her voice rose to a near shout. "What's not appropriate is a son who takes money from his widowed mother and then disappears in the middle of the night like a thief." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. She had just publicly accused me of stealing from her in front of my colleagues using words carefully chosen to make me look like the villain. "Mom, stop. You're creating a scene and you're not telling the truth about what happened." "The truth. The truth is that I trusted you with access to my accounts to help with bills, and now money is missing and you're gone. That's the truth, Cannon." My manager approached us with a diplomatic but firm expression. "Excuse me, but I'm going to have to ask you to take this discussion outside." We have clients in the building, and this is disrupting our work environment." Mom turned on him with wounded indignation. "I'm sorry for the disturbance, but I'm a desperate mother trying to understand why my son stole from me and ran away. Sometimes family emergencies can't wait for convenient timing." The lie was so audacious, so perfectly crafted to make her the victim, that I was speechless for a moment. She was publicly accusing me of theft, while she was the one who had stolen my identity. Security escorted her out, but the damage was done. For the rest of the day, I felt my coworkers' curious glances and whispered conversations. My boss called me into his office that afternoon. "I don't want to pry into your personal business," he said, "but I need to know if there are any legal issues I should be aware of. We handle sensitive client data here, and any employee who might be involved in financial impropriety is a potential liability." I explained the situation as professionally as possible, focusing on the fact that I was the victim of identity theft, rather than getting into the family dynamics. My boss seemed satisfied, but I could tell the incident had planted seeds of doubt about my character and judgment. That evening, Mom left a voicemail that chilled me to the bone. "I hope you're proud of yourself for embarrassing me and making me look like a fool. But this isn't over canon. I have documentation of everything, and people need to know the truth about what kind of person you really are." The threat was unmistakable. She was preparing to escalate her campaign of lies and manipulation. 2 days later, the phone calls started. My cousin Marcus called first. Dude, what the hell is going on with you and your mom? She's calling everyone in the family saying you stole her savings and took off. Grandma is freaking out." I tried to explain the real situation, but it was clear that Mom had gotten to the family first with her version of events. Her story was simple and compelling. Trusted son betrays widowed mother and disappears with her money. My story was complicated and sounded defensive. Mother commits identity theft and financial fraud against son who discovers the truth and moves out. Marcus listened politely, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "Look, I'm not taking sides, but this sounds pretty crazy. Your mom has always been dramatic, but accusing her of identity theft, that's serious criminal stuff. I have the credit card statements, Marcus. I can prove she opened accounts in my name. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe she thought she had permission, or maybe it was a clerical error at the bank. I mean, she's your mom. Why would she want to hurt your credit?" The conversation made me realize how effectively Mom had positioned herself as the victim. Her story was easier to believe because it fit people's expectations. Ungrateful child hurts sacrificing parent. The truth was too complicated and too ugly for people who wanted simple explanations. But Jake's investigation had uncovered something that would make Mom's victimhood narrative much harder to maintain. While researching her online presence for character evidence, he had discovered something disturbing on the next-door neighborhood social media app. "You need to see this," he said, handing me his laptop. "Your mom has been posting on Nextdoor for months about her brave battle with cancer. Look at these posts." The screen showed a series of heart-wrenching updates from Sarah Martinez about her chemotherapy treatments, her struggle to pay for medical bills, and her gratitude for the support of her wonderful neighbors. Dozens of elderly residents had responded with prayers, encouragement, and offers of help. "Check out the comments," Jake said, scrolling down. "Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down donated $300 for medical expenses. The Johnsons contributed $500. This elderly guy named Robert gave $800 to help with treatments." Post after post showed neighbors opening their hearts and wallets to support Mom's fictional cancer battle. She had created a detailed narrative complete with photos of herself at what she claimed were medical appointments, updates about treatment side effects, and grateful acknowledgments of the community's generosity. "This isn't just identity theft anymore," Jake said grimly. "This is charity fraud targeting elderly people on fixed incomes. If she's collected money from these neighbors under false pretenses, that's felony fraud with elderly victims. Prosecutors take this stuff very seriously." I stared at the screen, feeling sick. The woman who had lectured me about responsibility and character was systematically stealing from vulnerable senior citizens by faking cancer. The neighbors who had known our family for years, who had brought casseroles after Dad's funeral, and shoveled our driveway during snowstorms, were being victimized by someone they trusted and wanted to help. The scope of Mom's deception was far beyond anything I had imagined. This wasn't just financial manipulation within our family, it was predatory criminal behavior targeting the most vulnerable people in our community. The charity fraud discovery changed everything. What started as a personal betrayal had become evidence of serious crimes against innocent people. Jake and I spent the weekend documenting every Nextdoor post screenshot and community response we could find. "Look at this timeline," Jake said, spreading printouts across his dining room table. "The cancer posts started 8 months ago, right around the same time as the first credit card applications in your name. She's been running multiple scams simultaneously." The pattern was methodical and calculated. Mom would post about a particularly difficult treatment day, and neighbors would respond with offers of help. She would mention struggles with medical bills, and people would ask where they could send donations. She provided a P.O. box address for people who wanted to contribute financially to her treatment fund. This Mrs. Henderson seems to be her biggest target. I observed, pointing to several exchanges where the elderly woman had offered increasingly large amounts of help. She's mentioned donating 3 times in the past 2 months. Jake pulled up the county property records on his laptop. Mrs. Henderson is 81 years old and has lived in that house for 47 years. Her husband died 2 years ago. She's exactly the kind of vulnerable target these scammers usually prey on. The sick feeling in my stomach intensified. I remembered Mrs. Henderson from my childhood. She used to give out full-size candy bars on Halloween and let all the neighborhood kids pick apples from her tree every fall. The thought of Mom exploiting her grief and isolation to steal her money was beyond disgusting. "We have to report this," I said. "Absolutely, but we need to be prepared for the consequences. Once we involve law enforcement, this becomes a criminal investigation. There's no going back to handling this as a family matter." I thought about what that meant. Mom would be arrested. She would likely face federal charges for mail fraud and elder abuse. Her reputation in the community would be destroyed. Some part of me still loved her and didn't want to see her life ruined even after everything she had done. But then I thought about Mrs. Henderson and all the other elderly neighbors who had trusted Mom and given their limited resources to help someone they believed was suffering. They were the real victims here, and they deserved protection, even if it meant destroying what was left of my relationship with my mother. "Let's contact the police," I decided. Monday morning, we met with Detective Rodriguez from the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had clearly seen every type of fraud scheme imaginable. "Charity fraud cases are unfortunately common," she explained as we reviewed the evidence. "People create fake medical conditions, fake charities, or fake emergencies to exploit others' generosity. What makes this case particularly egregious is that the perpetrator appears to be targeting elderly neighbors who trust her personally." Detective Rodriguez was especially interested in the identity theft component. The combination of family identity theft and community fraud shows a pattern of escalating criminal behavior. This isn't someone who made one bad decision. This is someone who has been systematically committing crimes for months. She explained the next steps. They would open an official investigation, contact the victims to get statements and documentation of their losses, and coordinate with the Postal Service since mail fraud was involved. The credit card companies would also be interviewed as part of the identity theft investigation. "I need to warn you," Detective Rodriguez said, looking directly at me, "that family fraud cases can get messy. Your mother is likely to claim that you had knowledge of or participated in these activities. She may try to present this as a family dispute rather than criminal behavior. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I nodded, though the thought of Mom trying to drag me down with her was terrifying. "I have documentation showing that I was the victim of identity theft. and I had no knowledge of the charity fraud until this week. Good. Keep documenting everything, and don't have any unsupervised contact with her while this investigation is ongoing. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to process what I had set in motion. By Thursday, police would be interviewing Mrs. Henderson and other elderly neighbors about the money they had given to Mom's fake cancer fund. By next week, Mom would probably know that her charity fraud had been discovered. My phone rang around 9 p.m. It was Mom, and for the first time in weeks, I decided to answer. "Cannon, sweetheart, I'm so glad you picked up. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our fight, and I want to apologize." Her voice was warm and loving, completely different from the angry, manipulative tone she had used at my workplace. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. "I realize I was unfair to you. I was stressed about money and took it out on you, which wasn't right. I miss you so much, and I want us to work things out. Mom, we need to talk about more than just our argument." "Of course, honey. I know there are things we need to discuss. Why don't you come over this weekend? I'll make your favorite dinner and we can sit down and hash everything out like adults." The invitation sounded so normal, so much like the mother I remembered from before Dad died. But I knew what she didn't know, that the police investigation was already underway, that her victims were about to be contacted, and that her entire web of lies was about to collapse. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." "Cannon, please, I'm your mother. I love you, and I know you love me. We're family, and family works through their problems together. Don't let pride destroy the most important relationship in your life." The emotional manipulation was textbook perfect. Appeal to family loyalty, invoke love and shared history, make the victim feel guilty for maintaining boundaries. A month ago, it would have worked on me completely. "Mom, I know about the credit cards you opened in my name." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds. "What credit cards, Cannon? I don't know what you're talking about." "The bank card, the department store card, and the gas station card. All opened using my social security number and your phone number. I have the statements." "There must be some mistake. Maybe someone stole both of our identities. These identity theft rings are very sophisticated." Even caught red-handed, she was still lying and trying to position herself as a fellow victim. "Mom, I also know about the cancer posts on Nextdoor and the money you've been collecting from the neighbors." This time the silence lasted much longer. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you're making a very serious mistake. You have no idea what you're messing with." "I'm not playing any games. I'm trying to understand how the person who raised me to be honest and responsible could commit fraud against elderly neighbors who trusted her." "Those neighbors offered to help me during a difficult time. I never asked anyone for money." "You posted fake cancer updates and set up a P.O. box for donations. That's charity fraud." "You need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Slander is a crime, and I won't hesitate to protect myself legally if you continue spreading lies about me." The threat was clear: stop investigating or face legal consequences. But it was too late for threats. The police were already involved, and the investigation was already underway. "Mom, I think you should get a lawyer." "I think you should remember who you're talking to and what I'm capable of. You want to play hardball, fine. But don't say I didn't warn you about the consequences." She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what she meant by consequences. The mother I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who was clearly desperate and potentially dangerous. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I would have to call Detective Rodriguez and report the conversation. The investigation was about to get much more complicated, and I had the sinking feeling that Mom's next move would be something I never saw coming. Wednesday morning brought the call I had been dreading. Detective Rodriguez's voice was grim when she reached me at work. "We interviewed Mrs. Henderson and 2 other neighbors yesterday. The fraud is even worse than we initially thought. Mrs. Henderson alone has given your mother over $3,200 in the past 6 months. We're looking at potential losses exceeding $15,000 from elderly victims. The number hit me like a physical blow. $15,000 stolen from senior citizens living on Social Security and fixed pensions. Money they probably couldn't afford to lose, given to help someone they believed was dying of cancer. There's something else, Detective Rodriguez continued. We've been in contact with your mother's insurance company about some of the medical claims she's filed over the past year. They've been flagging several of her claims as potentially fraudulent. What kind of claims? Property damage claims for electrical fires, water damage from burst pipes, and appliance failures. The insurance investigator says the pattern and timing are suspicious. She's collected over $22,000 in claims that don't match the physical evidence at the scene. Insurance fraud on top of identity theft and charity scams. Mom had been running a one-woman crime spree while lecturing me about responsibility and character. We're going to need to interview you formally as a victim and potential witness, Detective Rodriguez said. Can you come in this afternoon? After hanging up, I sat in my office cubicle staring at my computer screen and trying to process the full scope of what Mom had been doing. She wasn't just manipulating our family relationship. She was systematically defrauding anyone who would trust her. Insurance companies, credit card companies, elderly neighbors, and her own son were all targets in her expanding web of schemes. My reflection was interrupted by a receptionist's voice over the intercom. Cannon, there's a police officer here to see you. My heart jumped. Detective Rodriguez hadn't mentioned sending someone to my workplace. I walked to the lobby and found a uniformed Denver police officer waiting with a serious expression. Mr. Martinez, I'm Officer Thompson. I need to speak with you about some allegations that have been made against you. My manager appeared at my elbow, clearly concerned about having police visit our office twice in 1 week. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Officer Thompson asked. We used an empty conference room, and Officer Thompson pulled out a small notebook. Mr. Martinez, we've received a report that you physically assaulted your mother and threatened her life. The complainant states that you have a history of violent behavior and that she fears for her safety. The words hit me like ice water. That's completely false. I haven't had any physical contact with my mother since I moved out 3 weeks ago. According to the report, the alleged assault took place over the past several months while you were living in her home. She came to the station yesterday with visible bruises and injuries that she says you caused. Mom had played her final, most devastating card. She was accusing me of domestic violence, complete with fake injuries, to discredit me before the fraud investigation could proceed. Officer Thompson. I've never laid a hand on my mother. This accusation is retaliation because I discovered that she's been committing identity theft and fraud. That may be, but we have to investigate all allegations of domestic violence seriously. She's provided photographs of injuries and a detailed statement about the alleged abuse. My hands started shaking. A domestic violence accusation could destroy my career, my reputation, and my future. Even if the charges were eventually dropped, the mere allegation would follow me forever. Can I see the photographs? Officer Thompson showed me pictures on his phone that made my stomach lurch. Mom's face showed dark bruises around her left eye and jaw, and her arms had what looked like finger-shaped marks near her wrists. These injuries look recent, Officer Thompson noted. When did you say you last had contact with your mother? 3 weeks ago when I moved out. But those bruises are fake. She's using makeup to create fake injuries. Even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. What kind of person accuses their mother of faking domestic violence injuries? Mr. Martinez, that's a very serious accusation. Are you saying your mother inflicted these injuries on herself? I'm saying she's desperate to stop a criminal investigation, and she's willing to lie about anything to protect herself. Officer Thompson. I'm a victim of identity theft by this woman. Detective Rodriguez from Financial Crimes can verify that there's an active investigation. Officer Thompson made notes and said he would coordinate with Detective Rodriguez, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Mom's story was simple and believable. Son becomes violent with widowed mother who depends on him financially. My story sounded like a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Are you planning to arrest me? Not at this time, but I need to advise you to have no contact with your mother while this investigation is ongoing. Any violation of that directive will result in immediate arrest. After Officer Thompson left, I called Jake in a panic. He listened to the entire story with growing alarm. This is bad canon. Really bad. Domestic violence allegations are taken extremely seriously, especially when there are photographs of injuries. Even if you're completely innocent, this will complicate everything. But the injuries are fake. She's using makeup or somehow creating fake bruises. Proving that is going to be incredibly difficult. You'd need expert testimony about makeup techniques, medical examination of the injuries, and evidence about when the photos were taken. Meanwhile, she has simple, compelling evidence pictures of a battered woman accusing her son of abuse. I felt like I was drowning. What do I do? First, document everything about your whereabouts and activities over the past month. If she's claiming specific dates for these alleged assaults, we need to prove you weren't present. Second, we need to gather any evidence that shows her capacity for deception and manipulation. The fraud investigation actually helps us here because it establishes a pattern of lies and criminal behavior. That evening, Mom called me again. Against Jake's advice, I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say after filing false domestic violence charges. "Cannon, I heard the police came to see you today." Her voice was calm and collected with just a hint of satisfaction. "You know exactly why they came to see me. You filed false charges against me." "False charges." "Sweetheart, I have photographs of what you did to me. I have medical records. I have witness statements from neighbors who heard the yelling and fighting. The lies were so elaborate and detailed that I almost doubted my own memory for a moment. Had there been yelling and fighting? Yes. Had I ever touched her violently? Absolutely not. Mom, I never hurt you physically. You know that and I know that. What I know is that you have serious anger management problems, and they've been getting worse since your father died. What I know is that I'm afraid of you, and I should have reported your violent behavior months ago. This is about the fraud investigation. You're trying to discredit me before the police can prove what you've been doing to the neighbors and the credit card companies. The only fraud here is your attempt to cover up your abusive behavior by making wild accusations about me. But it's not going to work, Cannon. The truth always comes out eventually. You're right about that. The truth will come out. I hope you're prepared for what happens when it does. Because once people know what kind of person you really are, you're going to find yourself very alone in this world. She hung up, leaving me with the chilling realization that she was playing a much deeper game than I had understood. The domestic violence allegations weren't just about discrediting me. They were about destroying my credibility so completely that no one would believe anything I said about her criminal activities. But Mom had made one critical mistake. In her rush to paint me as violent and unstable, she had forgotten that the elderly neighbors she had defrauded were about to tell their stories to police. And unlike her fake domestic violence charges, their stories would be backed up by canceled checks, bank records, and documentary evidence that couldn't be faked or manipulated. The truth was coming out, but it wasn't going to be the truth she expected. The investigation took a dramatic turn on Friday morning when Detective Rodriguez called with unexpected news. "Your mother's domestic violence allegations just fell apart," she said without preamble. "The medical examiner who reviewed the injury photographs says they're inconsistent with the claimed time frame and mechanism of injury." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to sit down. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the bruising patterns and coloration don't match someone who was allegedly assaulted 3 days ago. The photos show what appears to be theatrical makeup designed to simulate injuries. We've also found video evidence that contradicts her claims." "Video evidence?" "Your apartment building security cameras show your mother visiting your building multiple times over the past 2 weeks, including the day she claims to be afraid of you. The footage shows her behaving aggressively, pounding on doors and yelling at residents." This doesn't match someone who's terrified of her allegedly violent son. The security footage was something I had forgotten about. Mom's harassment visits to my building had been recorded by cameras I didn't even know existed. Bart, there's more, Detective Rodriguez continued. When we started interviewing the elderly victims about the charity fraud, several of them came forward with additional information that's relevant to your case. What kind of information? Mrs. Henderson told us that your mother has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about your alleged violent behavior for weeks. She's been telling people that she's afraid of you and that you stole money from her. Mrs. Henderson says she found it odd because she's known you since you were a child and never saw any signs of aggression or dishonesty. The manipulation was even more extensive than I had realized. Mom hadn't just been defrauding the neighbors. She had been poisoning them against me to prevent them from believing my version of events. Mrs. Henderson also mentioned something interesting, Detective Rodriguez added. She said your mother asked her not to call the police if she heard yelling or fighting from your house, because you might become violent with law enforcement. Mrs. Henderson thought it was a strange request, but now it makes sense as preparation for false allegations. Every detail of Mom's plan was becoming clear. She had been laying groundwork for weeks, planting stories about my supposed violence, while simultaneously stealing money from the same people she was manipulating. What happens next? We're bringing your mother in for questioning on Monday. She's facing charges for identity theft, charity fraud, insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and elder financial abuse. That's multiple felonies with potential federal charges, depending on how the mail fraud investigation develops. The magnitude of Mom's crimes was staggering. What started with her yelling at me about paying my own bills had uncovered a criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable people throughout our community. Monday morning, I was at my desk when Jake called with urgent news. Turn on Channel 7 News. They're covering your mother's arrest. I found a live stream on my computer and watched in surreal disbelief as news cameras showed Mom being led out of our family home in handcuffs. The reporter was explaining that a 52-year-old Lakewood woman had been arrested on multiple fraud charges related to schemes targeting elderly neighbors. Sarah Martinez is accused of creating fake charity drives, filing fraudulent insurance claims, and stealing the identity of family members to open unauthorized credit accounts, the reporter said. Police say the investigation began when victims of her alleged charity fraud came forward to report suspicious activity. The news story included interviews with Mrs. Henderson and other neighbors who had donated money to Mom's fake cancer fund. Mrs. Henderson looked frail but determined as she spoke to the camera. I trusted her because she was my neighbor and seemed to be going through such a difficult time. To find out that she was lying about having cancer and taking money from people who could barely afford to help is just heartbreaking. Watching Mrs. Henderson on television talking about how Mom had betrayed her trust and stolen her limited resources crystallized everything for me. This wasn't about family loyalty or forgiveness or working things out privately. This was about justice for people who had been victimized by someone they trusted. That afternoon, Detective Rodriguez called to update me on the interrogation. Your mother confessed to everything, she said. Once she realized how much evidence we had, she broke down and admitted to the identity theft, charity fraud, and insurance scams. What did she say about her motivations? She claims she developed a gambling addiction after your father's death and lost most of the life insurance money and widow benefits on online casino sites. When she couldn't pay her bills, she started with small insurance claims, then moved to identity theft, then charity fraud. She says each scheme was supposed to be temporary until she could get back on her feet. The explanation was pathetic and infuriating at the same time. Dad had worked construction for 25 years to provide financial security for his family. His life insurance and Social Security benefits were meant to take care of Mom for the rest of her life. Instead, she had gambled it all away and then turned to crime to maintain her lifestyle. She also admitted that the domestic violence allegations were false. She said she panicked when she realized the criminal investigation was expanding and thought discrediting you would make the charges go away. What's going to happen to her? She's looking at significant prison time. The elder abuse charges alone carry mandatory minimums, and the federal mail fraud charges could add years to her sentence. Her lawyer is probably going to recommend a plea bargain. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment looking at the news coverage on my laptop. Social media was full of comments from neighbors expressing shock and betrayal. People who had known Mom for years were struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the criminal who had been systematically defrauding elderly residents. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive of the victims and angry about the betrayal of trust. Several neighbors posted about how they had noticed Mom's expensive new car and home improvements over the past year, but assumed she was managing well financially after Dad's death. That evening, Mom's lawyer called me. "Mr. Martinez, I'm representing your mother in the fraud case. She's asked me to reach out to you about the possibility of a family meeting to discuss resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "She's hoping you might consider writing a character letter for her sentencing hearing, emphasizing her role as a grieving widow who made poor decisions but isn't a career criminal." The request was so tone-deaf that I almost laughed. After months of manipulation, lies, identity theft, and false domestic violence allegations, she wanted me to help minimize her punishment. "I don't think that's something I'm interested in." "I understand this has been difficult, but she's still your mother. A letter from you could make the difference between a lengthy prison sentence and a shorter term with probation. She stole money from elderly neighbors who trusted her. She destroyed my credit and nearly destroyed my reputation with false allegations. I'm not going to help her avoid consequences for her actions. Mr. Martinez, I hope you'll reconsider. Family support during sentencing can be very influential with judges." But my mind was made up. The woman who had raised me was gone, replaced by someone who was willing to hurt anyone to protect herself. Writing a character letter would be a betrayal of her victims and an enabling of her criminal behavior. Justice needed to be served, even if it meant my mother would spend years in prison. The elderly neighbors she had victimized deserved better than a system that prioritized family loyalty over accountability for crimes against vulnerable people. 6 months later, I sat in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Inglewood, waiting for my first face-to-face meeting with Mom since her arrest. She had been sentenced to 4 years in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge had been particularly harsh about the elder abuse charges, noting that targeting vulnerable seniors showed a callous disregard for human dignity. When Mom walked into the visiting room, I barely recognized her. The woman who had always been meticulously dressed and made up looked older, smaller, and genuinely humble for the first time in years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard prison uniform without any of her usual jewelry or makeup. We sat across from each other at a small table, both of us unsure how to begin a conversation that had been months in the making. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either. I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I take full responsibility for everything that happened." The words sounded genuine, very different from the manipulative language she had used throughout our final months together. Prison had apparently forced her to confront reality in ways that freedom had allowed her to avoid. The counselors here have helped me understand that I had a serious gambling addiction that I was hiding from everyone, including myself. When your father died, I felt so lost and powerless that the online gambling gave me a temporary escape from grief and fear. But every loss made me more desperate, and every scheme to recover the money made me more dishonest. She explained how the gambling addiction had spiraled from small bets to massive losses, consuming the life insurance money, the widow benefits, and eventually driving her to crime. The charity fraud, identity theft, and insurance scams were all attempts to cover gambling debts and maintain a lifestyle she could no longer afford. None of that excuses what I did to you or to our neighbors, she continued. I betrayed everyone who trusted me, and I nearly destroyed your life with those false domestic violence allegations. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. For the first time since childhood, I heard genuine remorse in her voice. The manipulation was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to finally understand the impact of her actions on other people. Mrs. Henderson came to see me last month, Mom said, surprising me. She wanted to tell me personally how much I hurt her. She said that losing the money was bad enough, but finding out that someone she cared about had lied to her about having cancer was devastating. She trusted me because she remembered bringing you cookies when you were 8 years old and helping your father fix our fence after that storm. Mom's voice broke slightly. She said she felt foolish for believing in my fake cancer story, but I told her that she wasn't foolish for being kind and generous. I was evil for exploiting those qualities. The shame of that conversation has stayed with me every day. Mrs. Henderson's visit had apparently been a turning point for Mom, forcing her to see her crimes through the eyes of her victims rather than through her own self-pity and rationalization. The other inmates here think I'm crazy for targeting elderly people, Mom continued. Even among criminals, there's a code about not hurting vulnerable people. I've had to confront the fact that what I did was predatory and cruel, not just desperate or misguided. We talked for nearly 2 hours about the gambling addiction, the progression of her crimes, and the therapy she was receiving in prison. For the first time in years, she seemed like the mother I remembered from before Dad's death, someone capable of honesty and self-reflection. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, as our visiting time neared its end. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you for exposing the truth, even though it meant sending me to prison. Those elderly neighbors deserved protection, and you were brave enough to provide it, even when it cost you the last family relationship you had. The conversation wasn't about reconciliation or rebuilding our relationship. It was about acknowledgement and closure. Mom was finally taking responsibility for her actions without expecting anything in return. I think Dad would have been proud of you too, I said. He always taught us to stand up for people who couldn't protect themselves. Mom nodded through tears. He did, and he would have been horrified by what I became. But he would have been proud of the man you turned out to be even when I was trying to make you feel guilty and worthless. As I drove away from the prison that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not because our family was reconciled, but because justice had been served and healing was beginning for everyone involved. Mrs. Henderson had recovered most of her money through asset forfeiture and restitution orders. The other elderly victims had also received compensation, and the community had rallied around them with support and solidarity. The credit card companies had cleared my accounts and restored my credit score. The false domestic violence charges had been expunged from my record. Most importantly, I had learned something valuable about integrity and courage. Standing up for what's right sometimes requires painful choices that feel like betrayal, but actually represent the highest form of loyalty to our values and our community. 3 months later, Mrs. Henderson invited me over for Sunday dinner. She had made her famous pot roast, the same recipe she had shared with Mom years earlier when our families were close neighbors. I want to thank you again for having the courage to report what was happening, she said, as we sat at her kitchen table. I know it wasn't easy to turn in your own mother, but you saved me and a lot of other people from losing even more money. I just did what felt right. Those elderly neighbors didn't deserve to be victimized by someone they trusted. Your father raised you well, Mrs. Henderson said. He would have done the same thing in your situation. As I walked home that evening, I thought about the lessons this experience had taught me. Family loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their actions. It means holding them accountable when they hurt innocent people. True integrity requires choosing what's right over what's easy, even when the personal cost is enormous. Mom would be released in 3.5 years, and maybe we would rebuild some kind of relationship based on honesty rather than manipulation. But even if we didn't, I had learned to find peace in knowing I had chosen justice over false family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies, and protection of the vulnerable over protection of the guilty. My phone showed a text message from Mrs. Henderson. "Thank you again for dinner company. It's nice to have a neighbor I can trust." That simple message meant more to me than any reconciliation with Mom could have provided. I had earned the respect of my community by doing what was right even when it was heartbreaking. The experience taught me that sometimes the people we love most are capable of great harm, and protecting others from that harm is the most loving thing we can do for everyone involved. Real family means teaching accountability, not enabling destruction. Now I'm curious to hear from all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right for others? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about real-life challenges and the difficult decisions we all face. And if you think someone in your life could benefit from hearing about courage, integrity, and standing up for what's right, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can share our experiences and learn from each other. I hope that whatever challenges you're facing, you find the strength to choose truth over comfort and justice over false peace. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story. End